The cafe was quiet in the early morning. The smell of fresh coffee and baked bread filled the air. A few regular customers had already arrived, sitting at the small tables near the windows. They sipped their drinks slowly, reading newspapers or quietly talking. Behind the counter, a young waitress moved carefully, carrying plates of food and refilling cups. She smiled politely at everyone, but her eyes always seemed to be somewhere else, as if she was thinking about things no one could see. She had been working at the cafe for several years. Most people saw her as quiet and helpful, someone who did her job well but never drew attention to herself. They never guessed that beneath her calm appearance, she carried stories and dreams that had been kept hidden for a long time. She knew the regulars' habits, what they liked to drink, and even the names of their pets. People trusted her because she was steady and kind. But no one thought of her as someone who might have secrets or talents waiting to be discovered. The cafe itself was small and cozy, the wooden tables and chairs that creaked slightly when people moved. On one side of the room, near the wall, there was an old piano. It had been there for years, gathering dust, and most people ignored it. Sometimes children would press a key or two, but it was mostly used as decoration. The paint was chipped, and the keys were a little yellowed, but anyone who looked closely could see it was a good piano once. The waitress often walked past it on her way to clean the tables or bring out desserts. Sometimes she would glance at it and feel a strange pull in her chest, a reminder of something from her past. Her mornings began early. She would arrive before sunrise, put on her apron, and start organizing the cafe. She swept the floors, wiped down the tables, and arranged the chairs just so. She liked things to be orderly, even when life outside felt messy. Most people didn't notice the effort she put in, but she didn't mind. It was her way of controlling a small corner of the world. Some mornings were busy, filled with the rush of customers grabbing breakfast on the way to work. Other mornings were slow, giving her time to move quietly through the cafe, restocking pastries and refilling sugar jars. She liked these quiet moments. They gave her space to breathe and think, moments that were hard to find outside the cafe. Sometimes she would pause near the piano, her fingers brushing lightly over the keys without making a sound. She didn't play in public anymore, not since life had forced her to focus on survival instead of dreams. Customers came and went. A man in a suit ordered his coffee the same way every day. No sugar, a little cream, and he would sit by the window reading emails on his phone. An older woman came in with her small dog, always asking for a slice of banana bread and a cup of tea. The waitress knew them all, and she served them with a soft smile. She liked watching people enjoy the little comforts of the cafe, even if she sometimes felt invisible. She was part of the rhythm of the place, moving quietly in the background, making sure everyone was comfortable. Her coworkers were friendly but busy with their own lives. The barista made jokes that made a few customers laugh, and the cook hummed while preparing eggs and bacon. The waitress moved among them like a shadow, doing her job, keeping the cafe running smoothly. She didn't seek attention, and she didn't complain. She had learned long ago that it was safer to stay quiet, to keep her past and her dreams to herself. The cafe had its own quiet magic. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching on the edges of coffee cups and plates, making the room feel warm and alive. The smell of freshly baked bread mixed with the rich aroma of coffee, creating a comfort that drew people in and made them stay longer than they intended. For the waitress, it was a place of both work and solace. She could watch the world go by through the windows, see the small joys and struggles of people's lives, and feel connected in a way that didn't require words. Sometimes she thought about the piano. It was strange to have such a beautiful instrument in the corner, mostly ignored, like a secret waiting to be discovered. She remembered the feel of the keys under her fingers, the way music used to flow. Through her, the long hours she spent practicing in her childhood, music had been her first love, something that made her feel alive and capable of touching hearts. But life had other plans, and she had to set aside her dreams to survive. Still, every now and then, the memory of music would surface, and she would feel a longing she couldn't quite shake. The day moved on slowly. More customers arrived, chatting softly, some working on laptops, others catching up with friends. The cafe had a rhythm of its own, the sounds of cups clinking, chairs moving, soft laughter, and footsteps on the wooden floor. The waitress moved among them, her actions precise and careful, always attentive, always kind. She liked to make people comfortable, to see them smile, even if she stayed in the background. Lunch came and went. The cafe was busier now, orders flowing quickly, and the waitress moved with practiced ease. She carried trays of food, refilled drinks, and made sure everything was perfect. Her co-workers relied on her, and the customers appreciated her calm presence. She felt a quiet satisfaction in doing her job well, even if no one noticed how much effort it took. By the afternoon, the cafe began to empty again. The sunlight shifted, casting long shadows across the tables. The waitress found a moment to pause, to breathe, and she walked slowly toward the piano. She didn't touch it yet, just looked at it. The memories came back, sharp and vivid. She remembered sitting at a piano in a small room, practicing for hours, learning pieces that seemed impossible at first. She remembered the thrill of performing, the way people's faces would light up when they heard her play. It was a feeling she had not experienced in years. She sighed quietly and returned to her work. She couldn't play in public anymore, not yet, not when life demanded her attention elsewhere. But the thought of the piano, sitting there in the corner, filled her with a strange hope. Maybe one day she would have the courage to play again, to let someone hear the music she carried inside. As the evening approached, the cafe grew quieter. A few late customers lingered, sipping tea or reading a book. The waitress moved among them, clearing tables, wiping crumbs, and making sure everything was neat. She worked steadily, methodically, her mind half on the tasks at hand and half on the piano. She felt a strange pull, a feeling that something was about to change, though she didn't know what. By the time the cafe was nearly empty, she was exhausted but calm. She wiped down the last table, stacked chairs, and checked the floors. The lights cast a soft glow, and the room felt peaceful. She paused for a moment near the piano, her fingers hovering over the keys. She didn't play yet, but the desire was strong. She knew the piano was more than just an instrument. It was a bridge to a part of herself that she had almost forgotten. The day ended quietly. The last customers left, leaving the cafe silent except for the soft ticking of a wall clock. Waitress took a deep breath, feeling the calm settle around her. She moved to the counter, washed her hands, and prepared to close up. Yet even as she went through the motions, her thoughts returned to the piano. The memory of the evening was calm, and the cafe had mostly emptied out. Only a few customers lingered, enjoying their last sips of tea or coffee. The young waitress moved through the room quietly, clearing tables and stacking chairs. Her mind, however, was not on the work before her. It kept returning to the piano in the corner, the dusty old instrument that had been mostly ignored for years. She had walked past it countless times, but tonight it felt different. There was a pull she couldn't explain, a quiet insistence that maybe, just maybe, she should sit down and play. She paused near the piano, her fingers brushing lightly over the keys. They felt familiar, even though it had been a long time since she had last played. Memories of childhood, of long hours spent practicing, came rushing back. Remembered the first piece she had learned, the small sense of triumph when she could play it without mistakes. She remembered the teachers who encouraged her, the friends who listened in awe. Music had been a constant companion in her life, something that gave her strength and comfort when the world felt overwhelming. But life had changed. Responsibilities, work, and survival had pushed music into the background. And yet the memory of it was still alive, whispering to her that it had not gone away. She straightened the bench in front of the piano, adjusting it so it felt just right. She inhaled slowly, feeling a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. She had not played in public for many years, and the idea of doing it now, even with only a few people in the cafe, made her heart race. She glanced at the remaining customers. They were absorbed in their own worlds, reading, chatting softly, or staring out the window. They would not expect her to do anything extraordinary. She would be just another waitress, quietly doing her job. But inside, she knew this moment could change everything. If only she found the courage to play. She sat down on the bench, her fingers hovering over the keys. For a moment, she did not touch anything. She just looked at the piano, feeling its weight, its history, and its quiet potential. She wondered if the piano remembered her touch, if it remembered the music that had once filled its body with sound. She smiled faintly, almost to herself, and let her fingers press lightly on a few keys. The sound was soft, slightly out of tune, but it was enough. It reminded her of what she could do, of what had been lost, but not forgotten. One of the remaining customers, an older man sitting near the window, glanced at her curiously. He had noticed her pause, the way she lingered near the piano. He smiled politely, thinking she might just be stretching or looking for something. Another customer, a young woman, noticed as well and quietly returned to her book, sensing something unusual in the air. No one yet knew what was about to happen, but the atmosphere in the cafe had subtly shifted. There was a quiet tension, an expectation that had nothing to do with words. The waitress took a deep breath, steadying herself. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting her mind calm and focus. She remembered the pieces she had learned, the ones that had meant the most to her. She chose one not because it was the most complicated or impressive, but because it carried the emotion she wanted to express. She wanted the music to tell a story, her story, even if no one knew the details. She pressed her fingers to the keys and began to play. The first notes filled the cafe softly, almost tentatively. They were not loud or showy, but they carried a sense of honesty that could not be ignored. The older man near the window paused, lowering his newspaper. The young woman stopped turning pages and looked up. Even the barista behind the counter, who was washing cups, froze for a moment. Something about the music caught their attention, though they did not yet understand why. It was not just a tune. It was an expression of feeling, of experience, of quiet strength that demanded to be heard. With each passing moment, the music grew more confident. Her fingers moved gracefully over the keys, remembering shapes and patterns that had once come naturally. She did not rush. She let the melody unfold slowly, each note deliberate and meaningful. It was as if she was speaking through the piano, telling a story that words could never capture. The cafe, once filled with small noises and casual chatter, grew quieter. People stopped what they were doing, drawn in by the sound, listening without thinking. The music filled the room in a way that made it impossible to ignore. The waitress felt something shift inside her. She realized she was no longer just a waitress, just a background presence. She was a musician again, fully alive in the moment, giving life to something beautiful. She felt the emotions she had kept hidden for years, fear, hope, longing, and courage all flowing through her fingers into the piano. She lost track of time, of who was watching, of everything except the music. It was both exhilarating and terrifying, but in the best possible way. The customers were captivated. The older man set his newspaper aside, leaning forward slightly in his chair. The young woman closed her book, her eyes wide with surprise and admiration. Even the barista and cook behind the counter paused, listening as the notes moved through the room. There was a silence that was not empty, but full of attention and emotion. The music had stopped casual conversation and small movements. It demanded focus, and everyone present felt it. The song reached its middle, where the melody deepened and became more complex. She poured her feelings into each chord, each note. It was not about perfection. It was about expression. Every movement was deliberate, every sound meaningful. She could feel the eyes of the cafe on her, but she did not look up. She let the music speak for her. It was a release, a sharing, a connection she had not felt in years. She was telling a story, not with words, but with the language of music that transcended speech. As the song continued, the room seemed to breathe along with her. Customers leaned back in their chairs, closing their eyes, feeling the music as it moved through them. There was a collective pause, a quiet reverence, a recognition that something extraordinary was happening. The cafe, which had seemed ordinary and familiar, now felt transformed. It was as if the music had created a bridge between the past and present, between the unseen and the visible, between the waitress and everyone in the room. She felt a sense of relief and joy. Years of hesitation, doubt, and fear seemed to melt away with each note. She remembered why she had loved music in the first place, why it had been her passion and her comfort. It was not about recognition or fame. It was about connection, expression, and the ability to touch hearts. And in this moment, she was connected to everyone in the room in a way that words could never achieve. When the song finally ended, there was a pause, a moment of stillness. No one moved or spoke immediately. The air felt charged with emotion, as if everyone had been holding their breath. Then, slowly, applause began. It was soft at first, hesitant, but it grew steadily. The customers clapped, some smiling, some wiping away tears they didn't realize had formed. The barista and cook behind the counter joined in, clapping loudly and cheering. The room, once quiet and ordinary, was now filled with warmth, admiration, and appreciation. The waitress sat back, her hands resting on the keys, breathing heavily but smiling softly. She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the customers. There was surprise, respect, and a quiet awe in their faces. They had seen something unexpected, something beautiful that had been hiding in plain sight. And she realized that she had also seen something: the power of courage, the joy of expression, and the importance of taking a chance when the moment called for it. The older man near the window spoke softly, almost to himself, asking where she had learned to play like that. The young woman whispered to her friend, saying she never expected to hear something so moving in a small cafe. Even the barista, usually playful and teasing, looked at her differently, with newfound respect. The waitress smiled quietly, realizing that this one song had changed the atmosphere, changed perceptions, and, in a small but meaningful way, changed her own life. She returned to her work, clearing the last dishes and wiping down tables, but she felt different. The cafe was still the same in structure and appearance, but it felt transformed. The music had left a mark, not just on the space, but on everyone present, including herself. And as she walked past the piano, she knew that this was only the beginning. The music inside her was alive again, and she would never ignore it the way she had before. The next morning, the cafe opened as usual. The sunlight streamed through the windows, casting warm patterns across the wooden floors. The waitress arrived early, as always, putting on her apron and moving quietly through the space. Today, however, something felt different. There was a subtle energy lingering in the air, a memory of last night's music that seemed to hum quietly under every surface. She noticed it in the way the chairs felt a little lighter, the smell of fresh coffee a little more inviting, and even in the way her steps echoed slightly differently on the wooden floor as she began her morning routine. She noticed the first customers of the day looking at her in a new way. The older man who had been near the window the previous night gave her a small nod and a warm smile. A young couple sat down, and their eyes lingered on her with an interest that went beyond a simple greeting. They had heard of the song, perhaps from friends or social media, and they seemed eager to see the quiet waitress in action. Even regulars, who had seen her countless times without noticing anything extraordinary, appeared more attentive. It was as if the music had opened a small door in everyone's perception, allowing them to notice something they had previously overlooked. She moved through her work as usual, clearing tables, refilling coffee cups, and attending to orders. But she could feel the change inside herself. The experience of playing the piano had awakened something she had kept buried for years. There was a quiet confidence, a warmth in her chest that told her she could do more than just serve food and drinks. She was capable of touching lives, of inspiring people in a way she had long forgotten. As the morning continued, a few people approached the counter asking her about last night's performance. They wanted to know what inspired her to play, where she had learned music, and whether she played often. She smiled softly, answering briefly but politely, careful not to reveal too much. Yet, she could sense the curiosity and admiration in their eyes. They saw a new side of her, a side that had always existed but had been hidden behind the routine of work and daily life. The piano in the corner seemed to beckon to her throughout the day. Every time she passed it, she felt a pull, a reminder that music was still a part of her life, waiting for the right moment. She thought about the song she had played and the effect it had on the room. It was not just the music itself, but the courage to share it that had made people listen and feel. She realized that the piano was more than an instrument. It was a bridge between her inner world and the lives of those around her, By mid-afternoon, the cafe had filled with more customers, some coming specifically because they had heard about the song. Word had spread quietly, through conversation and gentle recommendation. People were intrigued by the idea of a waitress with hidden talent, someone who could transform a simple cafe into a space of unexpected beauty. The waitress moved among them, serving food and drinks, smiling politely, all the while feeling a quiet anticipation. She wondered if she might play again, if another song could bring the same kind of connection. A young woman approached the counter hesitantly, carrying a small notebook. She introduced herself and asked if she could watch the waitress play the piano sometime. She explained that she was learning music herself and was curious about how someone could express so much emotion through an instrument. The waitress felt a small thrill. She had not expected anyone to be interested in observing or learning from her. Here was someone genuinely curious and respectful. She promised she would play later, though she did not commit to a time. The conversation left her with a sense of possibility, a reminder that music could reach beyond the moment of performance. The day passed in a mixture of ordinary tasks and subtle excitement. The cafe had its usual rhythm, but the underlying tension and energy made it feel alive in a new way. The waitress worked steadily, but her thoughts frequently returned to the piano. She imagined melodies, chords, and harmonies in her mind, feeling the urge to bring them into the real world. She realized that the music had not only affected the customers, but it also awakened her own sense of purpose and creativity. In the late afternoon, when the cafe began to quiet down, she found herself once again near the piano. Her fingers hovered over the keys, recalling the shapes and movements of the previous night. She played a few tentative notes, letting the sound fill the room softly. The effect was immediate. The remaining customers paused, turning their attention toward the corner. Their curiosity and respect were palpable, and the waitress felt a mixture of nervousness and exhilaration. She had expected the piano to be a private refuge, but she realized that sharing it with others could be a powerful experience. The music flowed more freely this time. She allowed herself to experiment with different rhythms and melodies, exploring the emotions that had built up inside her over the years. There was sadness and longing, but also hope and resilience. The customers listened, some closing their eyes, some leaning forward, all absorbing the feeling that the music conveyed. It was a dialogue without words, a conversation of emotion and experience that connected the performer with everyone in the room. She noticed subtle reactions that had not been visible the previous night. A man wiped a tear from his eye, an older woman smiled softly with a hint of nostalgia, and a teenager tapped his fingers along with the rhythm, caught up in the flow. These small responses filled her with a sense of fulfillment. She understood that the music was not just for herself. It was a gift to those who were willing to receive it. The cafe, which had seemed ordinary, had transformed into a space of shared experience, a place where people could feel deeply, even in the midst of routine life. After the song ended, the room remained quiet for a few moments. The customers were reluctant to break the spell, reluctant to return immediately to their own worlds. The waitress sat back, catching her breath and feeling the residual warmth of the performance. She realized that the music had the power to slow down time, to create a space where people could connect with themselves and each other in a way that daily life rarely allowed. She felt a profound satisfaction, a sense that she was doing exactly what she was meant to do in that moment. Over the next few days, the cafe began to attract more visitors. People came to see the quiet waitress who could fill a room with music and emotion. Some were curious, some were inspired, and some simply wanted to experience the unexpected magic of a song played in a familiar setting. The waitress continued her work as usual, but she felt a growing sense of confidence and purpose. She understood that her talent was not something to hide, but something to share when the right moment arose. She also began to notice the subtle ways in which people were affected by her music. Customers who had been quiet or reserved began to open up, engaging in gentle conversation or sharing stories of their own lives. Friends who came together laughed more freely and lingered longer over coffee and pastries. Even the staff, who had always been casual and light-hearted, showed a deeper respect for her abilities and a sense of camaraderie that had not been as strong before. The music had a ripple effect, touching everyone in small but meaningful ways. In the evenings, when the cafe was quiet, she allowed herself to explore the piano more fully. She experimented with melodies and harmonies, letting her emotions guide her fingers. Sometimes she played softly, allowing the music to blend with the natural sounds of the cafe. Other times, she played with more intensity, filling the room with energy and feeling. Each performance was different, a reflection of her mood and the subtle shifts in the environment. She discovered that music could be a form of storytelling, a way to communicate experiences and emotions that words could not capture. As she continued to play, she realized that the piano had become a partner in her life, a source of inspiration and comfort. It was not just an instrument. It was a mirror of her inner world, responding to her touch and reflecting her emotions back to her and to those who listened. The cafe, the customers, and even her coworkers had become part of a larger story. A living tapestry of human experience woven together by the power of music. She began to see herself differently as well. No longer just a quiet waitress in the background, she felt a sense of agency and purpose. She understood that her music had value, that it could move people and create moments of connection. She also recognized the responsibility that came with it to play with honesty, to express truthfully, and to be mindful of the impact her music could have on others. The experience of the past few days had transformed her perspective, making her more aware of the depth and potential of her own life. By the end of the week, the cafe had a subtle but noticeable change in atmosphere. The music had introduced a new layer of richness to the space. People came not just for coffee and food, but for the chance to experience something unexpected, something that could touch their hearts. The waitress moved among them with a quiet pride, knowing that she was contributing something meaningful to their day. She had rediscovered a part of herself, and in doing so, she had created a space where others could also rediscover theirs. The cafe had become more than just a place to eat and drink. It had quietly transformed into a space where people came to feel, to pause, and sometimes to be surprised by something extraordinary. The young waitress continued her work as usual, her movements calm and precise. But now there was a spark in her eyes that had not been there before. The piano in the corner seemed to hum with potential, and she felt drawn to it, almost as if it were calling her to reveal more of herself to the world. One afternoon, a man who had been sitting quietly in the cafe for some time approached her. He introduced himself as someone who had once taught music professionally. His eyes lit up as he spoke about the piano, and he mentioned that he had noticed the way she had played, even from across the room. There was admiration in his voice, but also a curiosity that hinted at wanting to understand more. The waitress felt a flutter of nerves, but also a quiet thrill. Here was someone who might see beyond the surface, who could recognize what she had long kept hidden. He asked if she had ever performed formally in recitals or concerts. She hesitated, thinking of the years when she had played in small competitions, in school events, when music had been her life. Life had pulled her in a different direction, and she had set aside her dreams to focus on work and responsibilities. Yet hearing the man speak with respect and interest stirred something deep inside her. She realized that her story was not unknown, not anymore, and that there was space to share it with others in a way that could be meaningful. The customers noticed the quiet tension, the way she seemed to pause and reflect before speaking. Some leaned forward, curious, sensing that something significant was unfolding. The cafe had always been a place of warmth and comfort, but now there was an element of anticipation in the air. People were waiting for more than coffee or pastries. They were waiting for a story, for an expression, for a moment that could change how they felt. The waitress began to share a little of her past, carefully in small pieces. She spoke of the hours spent learning music, of the long days of practice, of the joy she felt when she could finally play a difficult piece perfectly. She mentioned the teachers who had encouraged her, the friends who had listened with admiration, and the small victories that had once meant everything. Her voice was calm, yet there was emotion beneath the surface, quiet strength that made those listening lean in, absorbing every word. As she spoke, she noticed the reactions of the people around her. Some were moved, their eyes softening, their posture shifting as they listened. Others nodded quietly, recognizing the effort and dedication it took to pursue something so passionately. The man who had asked about her past smiled gently, acknowledging the depth of her journey. He understood that her talent had not been casual or accidental. It had been cultivated through discipline, sacrifice, and an enduring love for music. She paused, reflecting on the choices that had brought her here. Life had not been easy. Responsibilities, financial struggles, unforeseen challenges had required her to put aside her dreams, to focus on survival rather than expression. There were moments of doubt when she wondered if she had made the right decisions. Moments when she longed for the simplicity and joy of playing freely. Yet, standing in the cafe, seeing the interest and respect of those around her, she realized that her passion had never truly left her. It had been waiting, quietly, for the right moment to surface. A few customers began to share their own experiences, telling her how music had touched their lives in unexpected ways. One woman spoke of a song that had comforted her during a difficult time. Another man recalled learning to play an instrument as a child and how it had shaped his sense of patience and creativity. These small stories created a shared connection, a web of human experience that deepened the impact of the waitress's music. She listened with interest, feeling a sense of belonging that had been rare in her life. The conversation turned back to the piano. The waitress felt the familiar pull, the quiet insistence that she should play again. She looked around the room, noticing that the atmosphere had changed. The cafe was alive with anticipation, a gentle expectation that something meaningful was about to occur. She took a deep breath and approached the piano, adjusting the bench carefully, letting her fingers hover over the keys. The room grew quiet, not by demand, but by natural attention. Everyone present was waiting, listening, ready to experience whatever she was about to share. The first notes were tentative, soft and delicate, as if testing the waters. The music flowed slowly at first, building in confidence and expression. Her fingers moved over the keys with a familiarity born of years of practice, expressing emotions that had been held deep inside for too long. There was sadness, yes, but also resilience, hope, and a quiet joy. The sound filled the cafe, weaving through the air like a gentle wind. Touching the hearts of everyone present, the customers were captivated. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Others leaned forward, listening intently, feeling the depth of expression in each note. Even the staff, usually busy with their own tasks, paused to experience the unfolding performance. There was a collective awareness, a shared moment of connection that transcended words. The music had created a bridge between the waitress and everyone in the room, a silent conversation of emotion and understanding. As the song progressed, memories and emotions surfaced for the listeners. Some remembered loved ones, long past or far away. Others thought of moments of triumph or struggle in their own lives. The music seemed to reach into their hearts, unlocking feelings that had been quietly stored away. The waitress played not for recognition or applause, but to express herself honestly, to offer a piece of her inner world to those willing to receive it. The impact was immediate and profound. When the song ended, there was a pause, a gentle stillness that hung in the air. No one moved or spoke immediately, reluctant to break the moment. Then, gradually, soft applause began, growing in intensity as people expressed their admiration. Some whispered words of appreciation, others smiled warmly, and a few even wiped away tears they had not realized were there. The cafe, once ordinary and familiar, had become a space of shared human experience, transformed by the power of music and the courage to reveal one's hidden talents. The waitress sat back, her hands resting on the keys, breathing slowly, feeling the weight and beauty of the moment. She looked around at the faces of the people who had been touched by her music, recognizing the impact she could have on others. It was a revelation, a confirmation that the choices she had made, the sacrifices and struggles, had led to this point. Her passion had not been lost. It had merely been waiting for the right opportunity to emerge. In the following days, the cafe continued to draw attention. People came specifically to hear her play, to experience the unexpected joy and emotional depth that she brought. Regular customers treated her with a new level of respect, and even those who had only heard about her performances arrived with curiosity and anticipation. The atmosphere of the cafe was subtly but profoundly changed. It was no longer just a place to eat and drink. It had become a space of connection, reflection, and inspiration. The waitress continued to explore her music, each performance revealing more of her inner world. She experimented with melodies and harmonies, discovering new ways to express emotions and experiences. Each note was deliberate, each chord a reflection of her journey. She realized that music was not just a skill or talent. It was a way to communicate, to touch lives, and to create moments of shared humanity. She had found a way to give back, to offer something meaningful to those around her, and in doing so, she discovered a renewed sense of purpose and fulfillment. Through this process, she also learned more about herself. The courage to share her music, the willingness to be vulnerable, and the ability to connect with others through art had strengthened her confidence and sense of identity. She understood that her life experiences, both the struggles and the triumphs, had shaped her in ways that made her music richer and more authentic. The piano was no longer just an instrument in the corner. It was a partner, a mirror, and a channel for expressing her truth as the weeks passed. The cafe continued to thrive, and the presence of music became an integral part of its charm. Customers returned not just for food and drink, but for the experience of witnessing something extraordinary. The waitress's story unfolded gradually, revealing the depth of her journey and the power of quiet perseverance. Through music, she had transformed not only her own life, but also the lives of those around her, creating a lasting impact that went far beyond the walls of the cafe. The cafe had settled into a rhythm that felt both familiar and new. The young waitress moved among the tables with a quiet confidence, carrying plates and refilling cups, yet her mind often wandered to the piano in the corner. It had become more than a piece of furniture. It was a part of her life, a reflection of her journey, and a source of connection with those around her. Today felt different, as if something was about to happen that would leave a lasting impression on everyone in the room as the morning sun poured through the windows. A group of visitors arrived, having heard stories of the waitress and her music. They were curious and eager, their eyes scanning the room until they spotted her moving gracefully between tables. They ordered coffee and pastries, but their attention kept drifting toward the piano. The atmosphere was filled with a quiet anticipation, a sense that something special was about to unfold. The waitress noticed their interest, but did not rush. She knew that the right moment, like music itself, could not be forced. The regulars had also gathered, sensing that today might be different. The older man who had spoken with her about music lingered near the window, smiling with quiet encouragement. Other familiar faces who had grown accustomed to her calm presence and occasional performances seemed more attentive, ready to witness whatever was about to happen. There was a shared understanding in the room, a subtle energy that connected everyone present without words. It was the kind of anticipation that only occurs when people sense authenticity and emotion. It's about to be revealed. The waitress approached the piano. Adjusting the bench and letting her fingers hover above the keys, she took a deep breath, feeling the familiar pull of the instrument beneath her hands. Today, she decided, she would play not just for herself or for practice, but for the people who had come to listen, for the connections that had formed over the past weeks. She felt a sense of responsibility, knowing that the music carried more than sound. It carried emotion, stories, and the possibility of change. As she pressed the first key, the notes floated gently into the room, soft and deliberate. The melody began to take shape, a slow and expressive piece that spoke of longing, resilience, and quiet hope. The visitors paused, their attention fully captured, sensing the depth of feeling in each note. The regulars leaned in, some closing their eyes, others holding their hands together in silent appreciation. Even the staff, who had grown accustomed to the music, felt a fresh wave of emotion, reminded of the transformative power of art. The song progressed, building in intensity and richness. The waitress poured her heart into every chord, letting the music express what words could not. There were moments of tension and release, of quiet reflection and soaring emotion. The customers felt themselves swept along by the performance, experiencing a range of feelings that resonated with their own lives. Some remembered lost loved ones, some recalled personal struggles, and some simply felt the beauty of being present in the moment, connected to something larger than themselves as she played. The waitress became aware of the reactions around her. Tears glistened in the eyes of some, smiles formed on the faces of others, and an unspoken understanding passed between everyone in the room. It was a shared experience, a collective acknowledgement of the power of expression and human connection. The cafe, once an ordinary space, had become a sanctuary of emotion, a place where hearts were touched and souls were moved by the honesty and skill of one person. Midway through the piece, she allowed herself a brief glance at the audience. She saw the older man near the window nodding slightly, a quiet approval in his eyes. She saw the young woman who had approached her earlier, notebook in hand, taking careful notes and watching intently. Even the casual visitors who had come out of curiosity were fully absorbed, as if the music had created